Welcome back, friends. This is the Lone Star Ranger, Book 2, The Ranger. And it looks like things are getting a little bit rowdy. So let's get ready to ride. A low cry greeted Dwayne. The room was light. He saw Ray Longstreth sitting on her bed in her dressing gown. With a warning gesture to her to be silent, he turned to close the door. It was a heavy door without bolt or bar, and when Dwayne had shut it, he felt safe only for the moment. Then he gazed around the room. There was one window with blind closely drawn. He listened and seemed to hear footsteps retreating, dying away. Then Dwayne turned to Miss Longstreth. She had slipped off the bed half to her knees and was holding out trembling hands. She's white as the pillow on her bed. She was terribly frightened. Again, with warning hand, he commanded silence. Dwayne stepped softly forward, meaning to reassure her. "Oh," she whispered wildly, and Dwayne thought she was gonna faint. When he got close and looked into her eyes, he understood the strange, dark expression in them. She was terrified because she believed he meant to kill her, or do worse. Probably worse. Dwayne realized he must have looked pretty hard and fierce bursting into her room with a big gun in his hand. The way she searched Dwayne's face with doubtful, fearful eyes hurt him. "Listen, I didn't know this was your room. I came in here to get away, to save my life. I was pursued. I was spying on your father and his men. They heard me, but they did not see me. They don't know who was listening. They're after me now." Her eyes changed from blank gulfs to dilating, shadowing, quickening windows of thought. And she stood up and faced Dwayne with that fire and intelligence of a woman in her eyes. "Tell me now, you were spying on my father?" Briefly, Dwayne told her what had happened before he entered the room, not admitting a terse word as to the character of the men he had watched. My God, so it's that. I knew something was terribly wrong here with him, with this place, the people, and right off I hated Floyd Lawson. Oh, it'd kill me if I... It's so much worse than I dreamed. What shall I do? The sound of soft steps somewhere near distracted Dwayne's attention and reminded him of her peril. And now what counted more with him made clear the probability of being discovered in her room. "I have to get out of here," whispered Dwayne. "Wait," she replied. "Didn't you say they were hunting for you?" "They sure are," he returned grimly. "Oh, well, then you mustn't go. They might shoot you before you got away. Stay. If we hear them, you can hide. I'll turn out the light. I'll meet 'em at the door. You can trust me. Wait till it quiets down. If we have to wait till morning, then you can slip out." "I ought not stay. I don't want to, I won't," Dwayne replied, perplexed and stubborn. "But you must. It's the only safe way. They won't come here." "Suppose they should? It's an even chance. Longstreth will search every room and corner of this old house. They found me here. I couldn't start a fight. You might get hurt. And the fact of my being here, well..." Dwayne didn't finish what he meant, but instead made a step toward the door. White of face and dark of eye, she took hold of him to detain him. She was as strong and supple as a panther, but she need not have been either resolute or strong, for that clasp of her hand was enough to make Dwayne weak. "Up yet, Ray?" came Longstreth's clear voice, too strained, too eager to be natural. "No, I'm in bed reading. Good night," instantly replied Miss Longstreth, so calmly and naturally that Dwayne marveled at the difference between man and woman. Then she motioned for Dwayne to hide in the closet. He slipped in, but the door wouldn't close altogether. "Are you alone?" went on Longstreth's penetrating voice. "Yes," she replied. "Ruth went to bed." The door swung inward with a swift scrape and ajar. Longstreth half entered, haggard, flaming-eyed. Behind him Dwayne saw Lawson, and indistinctly another man. Longstreth barred Lawson from entering, which action showed control as well as distrust. He wanted to see into the room. When he had glanced around, he went out and closed the door. Then what seemed a long interval ensued. The house grew silent once more. Dwayne could not see Miss Longstreth, but he heard her quickening breathing. How long did she mean to let him stay hidden here? Hard and perilous as his life had been, this was kind of a new adventure. He had divined the strange softness of his feelings as something due to his magnetism of this beautiful woman. It hardly seemed possible that he, who had been outside the pale for so many years, could have fallen in love. Yet that must be the secret of his agitation. Presently he pushed open the closet door and stepped forth. Miss Longstreth had her head lowered upon her arms and appeared to be in distress. At his touch, she raised her quivering face. "I think I can go now, safely," he whispered. "Go then, if you must, but you may stay till you're safe," she replied. I couldn't thank you enough. It's been hard on me, this finding out, and you his daughter. I feel strange. I don't understand it myself well, but I want you to know, if I were not an outlaw, a ranger, I'd lay my life at your feet. Ah, you've been so little of me," he faltered. "All the same, it's true. And that makes me feel more trouble my coming caused you. You will not fight my father?" "Not if I can help it. I'm trying to get out of his way." "But you spied upon him." "I'm a ranger, Miss Longstreth." "And I'm a rustler's daughter," she cried. "That's so much more terrible than I'd suspected. It was tricky cattle deals I imagined he was engaged in. But only tonight I had strong suspicions aroused." "How? Tell me." "I overheard Floy say that the men were coming tonight to arrange a meeting for my father at the rendezvous near Old Ord. Father did not want to go. Floyd taunted him with a name." "What name?" queried Dwayne. "It was Cheseldine." "Cheseldine? My God, Miss Longstreth, why did you tell me that?" "What difference does that make?" "Your father and Cheseldine are one and the same," whispered Dwayne hoarsely. "I gathered so much myself," she replied miserably, "but Longstreth is father's real name." Dwayne felt so stunned he could not speak at once. It was the girl's part in this tragedy that weakened him. The instant she betrayed the secret, Dwayne realized perfectly that he did love her. The emotion was like a great flood. "Miss Longstreth, all this seems so unbelievable," he whispered. "Cheseldine is the rustler chief I've been come out here to get. He's only a name. Your father's a real man, and I swore to get him. I'm bound by more than law or oaths. I can't break what binds me, and I must disgrace you, wreck your life, or why, Miss Longstreth, I believe I love you. It's all come in a rush. I'd die for you if I could. How fatal terrible this all is. How things work out." She slipped to her knees with her hands on his. "You won't kill him," she implored. "If you care for me, you won't kill him." "No, that I promise you." With a low moan, she dropped her head upon the bed. Dwayne opened the door and stealthily stole out through the corridor into the court. When Dwayne got out into the dark, where his hot face cooled in the wind, his relief equaled his other feelings. The night was dark, windy, stormy, yet there was no rain. Dwayne hoped, as soon as he got clear of the ranch, to lose something of the pain he felt. But long after he tramped out into the open, there was a lump in his throat and an ache in his breast. All this thought centered around Ray Longstreth. What a woman she turned out to be. He seemed to have a vague, hopeless hope that there must be, some way he could save her. Before going to sleep that night, Dwayne had decided to go to Ord to try and find the rendezvous where Longstreth was to meet his men. These men Dwayne wanted even more than their leader. If Longstreth or Cheseldine was the brains of that gang, Poggin was the executor. It was Poggin who needed to be found and stopped. Poggin and his right-hand men. Dwayne experienced a strange, tigerish thrill. It was thought of Poggin more than thought of success for McNally's plan. Dwayne felt dubious over his emotion. Next day he set out for Bradford. He was glad to get away from Fairdale for a while, but the hours and the miles in no wise changed the new pain in his heart. The only way he could forget Miss Longstreth was to let his mind dwell upon Poggin, and even this was not always effective. He avoided Sanderson, and at the end of the day and a half he arrived at Bradford. The night of the day before he reached Bradford, the number 6, the mail and express train going east, was held up by train robbers. The Wells Fargo messenger killed over his safe, the mail clerk wounded, the bags carried away. The engine of the number 6 came into town minus even a tender, and engineer and fireman told conflicting stories. A posse of railroad men and citizens, led by a sheriff that Dwayne suspected was crooked, was made up before the engine steamed back to pick up the rest of the train. Dwayne had the sudden inspiration that he had been cudgeling his mind to find, and acting upon it, he mounted his horse again and left Bradford unobserved. As he rode out into the night, over a dark trail in the direction of Ord, he uttered a short, grim, sardonic laugh at the hope that he might be taken for a train robber. He rode at an easy trot most of the night. When the black peak of Mount Ord loomed up against the stars, he halted, tied his horse, and on. He had brought a small pack, and now he took his time cooking breakfast. When the sun was well up, he saddled Bullet, and leaving the trail where his tracks showed plain in the ground, put his horse to the rocks and the brush. He selected an exceedingly rough runabout and difficult course to Ord, hid his tracks with the skill of a long-hunted fugitive, and arrived there with his horse winded and covered with lather. It added considerable to his arrival that the man Dwayne remembered as Fletcher and several others saw him come in the back way through the lots and jump a fence into the road. Dwayne led Bullet up to the porch where Fletcher stood wiping his beard. He was hatless, vestless, and evidently had just enjoyed a morning drink. "Howdy, Dodge," said Fletcher laconically. Dwayne replied, and the other man returned the greeting with interest. "Jim, my hoss is done up. I want to hide him from any chance tourists as might happen to ride up curious-like." "Ha!" Dwayne gathered encouragement from the chorus of laughter. "Well, if them tourists ain't too dern snooky, hoss'll be safe in the adobe shack back of Bill's here. Feed there, too, but you'll have to rustle up some water." Dwayne led Bullet to the place indicated, had care for his welfare, and left him there. Upon returning to the tavern porch, Dwayne saw the group of men he had been added to by others, some of whom had seen before. Without comment, Dwayne walked along the edge of the road, and wherever one of the tracks of his horse showed, he carefully obliterated it. This procedure was attentively watched by Fletcher and his companions. "Well, Dodge," remarked Fletcher as Dwayne returned, "that's safer'n praying for rain." Dwayne's reply was a remark as loquacious as Fletcher's, to the effect that a long, slow, monotonous ride was conducive to thirst. They all joined him, unmistakably friendly. But Nell was not there, and most assuredly not Poggin. Fletcher was no common outlaw, but whatever his ability, it probably lay in execution of orders. Apparently, at that time, these men had nothing to do but drink and lounge around the tavern. Evidently, they were poorly supplied with money, though Dwayne observed they could borrow a peso occasionally from the bartender. Dwayne set out to make himself agreeable and succeeded. There was a card playing for small stakes, idle jests of coarse nature, much bantering among the younger fellers, and occasionally a mild quarrel. All morning men came and went, and all told, Dwayne calculated he'd seen at least 50. Toward the middle of the afternoon, a young fellow burst into the saloon and yelled one word, "Posse!" From the scramble to get outdoors, Dwayne judged that the word and ensuing action was rare and odd. "What the hell?" muttered Fletcher, as he gazed down the road at a dark, compact bunch of horses and riders. "First time I ever seen that here in Ord. We're getting popular like them camps out of Valentine. Wish Phil was here, or Poggy. Now all you gents keep quiet. I'll do the talking." Posse entered the town, trotted up on dusty horses, and halted in a bunch before the tavern. The party consisted of about 20 men, all heavily armed and evidently in charge of a clean-cut, lean-limbed cowboy. Dwayne experienced considerable satisfaction at the absence of the sheriff, who he had understood to lead the posse. Perhaps he was out in another direction with a different force. "Hello, Jim," Fletcher called the cowboy. "Howdy," replied Fletcher. This short, dry response, and the way he strode leisurely out before the posse, Dwayne found himself modifying his contempt for Fletcher. The outlaw was different now. "Fletcher, we've tracked a man to all but 3 miles of this place. Tracks as plain as nose on your face. Found his camp, and then he hit to the brush, and we lost his trail. Didn't have no tracker with us. Think he went into the mountains, but we took a chance and rid over here the rest of the way. Seeing Ord was so close, anybody come in here late last night or early this morning?" "Nope," replied Fletcher. His response was what Dwayne had expected from his manner, and evidently the cowboy took it as matter of course. He turned to the others of the posse, entering into a low consultation. Evidently there was a difference of opinion, if not real dissension, in the posse. "Didn't I tell you he was a wild goose chase coming way out here?" protested an old hawk-faced rancher. "Them hoss tracks we followed ain't like any of them we seen at the water tank where the train was held up." "I'm not so sure of that," replied the leader. "Well, Guthrie, I've followed tracks all my life, but you couldn't keep to the trail this feller made in the brush. Give me time and I could. That takes time. And here you go hell-bent for election, but it's wrong to lead out this way. If you're right, this road agent, after he killed his pals, would have rid right back through town. And with them mailbags, supposing there was greasers. Some greasers has sense, and when it comes to thieving, they're sure cute about it. But we ain't got any reason to believe this robber who murdered the greasers is a greaser himself. I tell you, it was a slick job, done by no ordinary sneak. Didn't you hear the facts? One greaser hoped the engine and covered the engineer and fireman. Another greaser kept flashing his gun outside the train. The big man who shoved back the car door and did the killing, he was the real gent, and don't you forget it." Some of the posse sided with the cowboy leader and some of the old cattlemen. Finally, the young leader, disgusted, gathered up his bridle. "Oh, hell, that sheriff shoved you off this trail. Maybe he had reasons, savvy? If he had a bunch of cowboys with me, I tell you what, I'd take a chance and clean up this hole." All the while, Jim Fletcher stood quietly with his hands in his pockets. "Guthrie, I'm sure treasuring up your friendly talk," he said. The menace was in his tone, not the content of his speech. "You can, and damn to you, Fletcher," called Guthrie as the horses started. Fletcher, standing out alone before the others of his clan, watched the posse out of sight. "Luck for you all that Poggy wasn't here," he said, and then disappeared. Then, with a thoughtful mien, he strode up onto the porch and led Dwayne away from the others into the bar room. When he looked into Dwayne's face, it was somehow an entirely changed scrutiny. "Dodge, where do you hide this stuff?" "I reckon I get in on this deal, seeing I staved off Guthrie." Dwayne played his part. Here was his tiger after a prey when he seized it. First he coolly eyed the outlaw and then disclaimed any knowledge of whatever the train robbery other than Fletcher had heard himself. Then at Fletcher's persistent admiration and increasingly show of friendliness, he laughed occasionally and allowed himself to swell with pride, though still denying. Next he feigned a lack of consistent willpower and seemed to be wavering under Fletcher's persuasion, and he grew silent and then surly. Fletcher, evidently sure of ultimate victory, desisted for the time being. However, his solicitations regarding close companionship for the rest of that day he betrayed the bent of his mind. Later, when Dwayne started up, announcing his intention to get his horse and make for camp out in the brush, Fletcher seemed grievously offended. "Why don't you stay with me? I got a comfortable dobe over there. Didn't I stick by you when Guthrie and his bunch come up? Supposing I hadn't showed down a cold hand to 'em, you'd be swinging somewhere now. I tell you, Dodge, it ain't square." "I'll square it. I pay my debts," replied Dwayne. "But I can't put up here all night. If I belonged to the gang, it'd be different." "What gang?" asked Fletcher bluntly. "Why, Cheseldine's." Fletcher's beard nodded as his jaw dropped. Dwayne laughed. "I run into him the other day. Knowed him on sight. Sure, he's been the kingpin rustler. When he seen me and asked me the reason I had for being on Earth or some such like, why, I up and told him." Fletcher appeared staggered. "Who in all fired hell are you talking about?" "Didn't I tell you once? Cheseldine. He calls himself Longstreth over there." All of Fletcher's face, not covered by hair, turned a dirty white. "Cheseldine's Longstreth?" he whispered hoarsely. "Gord almighty. You brace the—" Then a remarkable transformation came over the outlaw. He gulped. He straightened his face. He controlled his agitation, but he could not send the healthy brown back to his face. Dwayne, watching this rude man, marveled at the change in him, the sudden checking of movement, the proof of wonderful fear and loyalty. It all meant Cheseldine, a master of men. "Who are you?" queried Fletcher in a queer, strained voice. "You gave me a handle, didn't you? Dodge. That's as good as any." "Sure, it hits me hard, Jim. I've been pretty lonely for years, and I'm getting in need of pals. Think it over, will you? See you mañana." The outlaw watched Dwayne go off after his horse and watched him as he returned to the tavern, watched him ride out into the darkness, all without a word. Dwayne left town, threaded a quiet passage through the cactus and mesquite to a spot he had marked before. He made ready for the night. His mind was so full he found sleep aloof. Luck, it was playing his game. He seemed the first slow heave of a mighty crisis. The end, always haunting, had to be sternly blotted from thought. It was the approach that needed all of his mind. He passed the night there, and late in the morning, after watching trail and road from a ridge, he returned to Ord. If Jim Fletcher tried to disguise his surprise, the effort was a failure. Certainly he had not expected to see Dwayne again. Dwayne allowed himself a little freedom with Fletcher, an attitude hereto lacking. The afternoon, a horseman rode in from Bradford, an outlaw evidently well known and liked by his fellows, and Dwayne heard him say, before he could possibly have been told, the train robber was an Ord, that the loss of money in the holdup was slight. Like a flash, Dwayne saw the luck of his report. He pretended not to have heard. In the early twilight, at an opportune moment, he called Fletcher to him. Linking his arm with the outlaw's, he drew him off in a stroll to a log bridge spanning a little gully. Here, after gazing around, he took out a roll of bills, spread it out, split it equally, and without a word handed one half to Fletcher. With clumsy fingers, Fletcher ran through the roll. 500, he exclaimed. Dodge, that's damn handsome of you, considering the job wasn't. Considering nothing, interrupted Dwayne. I'm making no reference to a job here nor there. You did me a good turn. I split my pile. If that doesn't make us pards, good turns and money ain't no use in this country. Fletcher was one. The two men spent much time together. Dwayne made up short, fictitious story about himself that satisfied the outlaw. Only it drew forth a laughing jest upon Dwayne's modesty, for Fletcher did not hide his belief that his new partner was a man of achievements. Nell and Poggin, and then Cheseldine himself, would be persuaded of this fact, so Fletcher boasted. He had influence. He would use it. He thought he pulled a stroke with Nell, but nobody on earth, not even the boss, had any influence on Poggin. Poggin was concentrated ice part of the game. All the rest he was bursting hell. But Poggin loved a horse. He never loved anything else. He could be won with that black horse bullet. Cheseldine was already won by Dwayne's monumental nerve, otherwise he would have killed Dwayne. Little by little, the next few days, Dwayne learned the points he longed to know, and how indelibly they etched themselves in his memory. Cheseldine's hiding place was on the far slope of Mount Ord in a deep, high-walled valley. He always went there just before he contemplated a job, where he met and planned with his other lieutenants. Then while they executed, he basked in the sunshine before one or another of the public places he owned. He was there in Ord now, getting ready to plan the biggest job yet. It was a bank robbery, but where Fletcher had not as yet been advised. Then when Dwayne had pumped the now amiable outlaw of all the details pertaining to the present, he gathered data and facts and places covering a period of 10 years Fletcher had been with Cheseldine. And herewith was unfolded a history so dark in its bloody regime, so incredible in its brazen daring, so appalling in its proof of the outlaw's sweep and grasp of the country from Pecos to Rio Grande, that Dwayne was stunned. Compared to this, Cheseldine of Big Bend, to this rancher, stock buyer, cattle speculator, property holder, all the outlaws Dwayne had ever known sank into insignificance. The power of the man stunned Dwayne. A strange fidelity given him. The intricate inside working of his great system was equally as stunning. But when Dwayne recovered from that old terrible passion to kill, consumed him, and it raged fiercely, and it would not be checked. If that red-handed Poggin, if that cold-eyed, dead-faced Nell had only been at Ord, but they were not. And Dwayne, with the help of time, got what he hoped was the upper hand for himself. Again, inaction and suspense dragged at Dwayne's spirit. Like a leashed hound with a keen scent in his face, Dwayne wanted to leap forth when he was bound. He almost fretted. Something called to him over the bold, wild brow of Mount Ord. But while Fletcher stayed in Ord waiting for Nell and Poggin or for orders, Dwayne knew this was going to be a waiting game. But one day there were signs of the long quiet of Ord being broken. A messenger strange to Dwayne rode in on a secret mission that had to do with Fletcher. When he went away, Fletcher became addicted to thoughtful moods and lonely walks. He seldom drank, and this in itself was in striking contrast to his former behavior. The messenger came again. Whatever the communication he brought, it had a remarkable effect upon the outlaw. Dwayne was present in the tavern when the fellow arrived and saw a few words that he whispered but couldn't hear them. Fletcher turned white with anger or fear, perhaps both, and cursed like a madman. The messenger, a lean, dark-faced, hard-riding feller named, reminded Dwayne of Guthrie, the cowboy. He left the tavern without even a drink and rode off to the west. This West mystified and fascinated Dwayne as much as the South beyond Mount Ord. Where were Nell and Poggin? Apparently they were not present with the leader on the mountain. After the messenger left, Fletcher grew silent and surly. He had presented a variety of moods in Dwayne's observation, and this latest one was provocative of thought. Fletcher was dangerous. It became clear now that the other outlaws of the camp feared him. They kept out of his way. Dwayne left him alone, yet closely watched him. Perhaps an hour after the messenger had left, if not longer, Fletcher manifestly arrived at some decision, and he called for his horse. Then he went to his shack and returned. To Dwayne, the outlaw looked in shape both to ride and fight. He gave orders to the men in camp to keep close until he returned. Then he mounted. "Come here, Dodge," he called. Dwayne went up and laid his hand on the pommel of the saddle. Fletcher walked his horse, and Dwayne beside him, then till they reached the log bridge, when they halted. "Dodge, I'm in bad with Nell," he said, "and it appears I'm the cause of friction between Nell and Poggy. Nell never had any use for me, but Poggy's been square, if not friendly. The boss has a big deal on, and it's been held up because of this scrap. He's waiting over there in the mountain to give orders to Nell or Poggy, and neither one's showing up. I've got to stand in the breach, and I ain't enjoying the prospects." "What's the trouble about, Jim?" asked Dwayne. "Reckon it's about you, Dodge," said Fletch dryly. "Nell hadn't any use for you that day. He ain't got no use for a man unless he can rule him. Some of the boys here have blabbed before I edged in with my say, and there's going to be hell to pay. Nell claims to know something about you that'll make both the boss and Poggy sick when he springs it, but he's keeping it quiet. Hard man to figure that, Nell. Reckon you better go back to Bradford for a day or so and camp out near here till I come back." "Why?" "Well, 'cause there ain't no use for you getting in bad, too. A gang will ride over here any day. They're friendly. I'll light a fire on the hill there, say 3 nights from tonight. If you don't see that light, you hit the trail. I'll do what I can. Jim Fletcher sticks to his pals. So long, Dodge." Then he rode away. He left Dwayne in a quandary. This news was black. Things had been working out so well. Here was a setback. At the moment, Dwayne did not know which way to turn, but certainly he had no idea of going back to Bradford. Friction between the 2 great lieutenants of Cheseldine. Open hostility between one of them and another of the chief's right-hand men. Among outlaws, that sort of thing was deadly serious. Generally, such matters were settled with guns. Dwayne gathered encouragement even from this disaster. Perhaps the disintegration of Cheseldine's great band had already begun. But what did Nell know? Dwayne did not circle around the idea with doubts and hopes. If Nell knew anything, it was that this stranger in Ord, this new partner of Fletcher's, was no less than Buck Dwayne. Well, it was about time, thought Dwayne, that he made use of his name, and if it were to help him at all. That name had been McNally's hope. He had anchored all his scheme to Dwayne's fame. Dwayne was tempted to ride off after Fletcher and stay with him. This, however, would hardly be fair to an outlaw who had been fair to him. Dwayne concluded to await developments, and when the gang rode into Ord, probably from their various hiding places, he would be there ready to denounce by Nell. Dwayne could not see any other culmination of this series of events than meeting between Nell and himself. If that terminated fatally for Nell, there was all probability of Dwayne being in no worse situation than he was right now. If Poggin took up the quarrel. Here, Dwayne accused himself again, tried in vain to revolt from judgment that he was only reasoning out excuses to meet these outlaws. Meanwhile, instead of waiting, why not hunt for Cheseldine up in the mountain retreat? The thought no sooner struck Dwayne than he was hurrying for his horse. He left Ord ostensibly toward Bradford, but once out of sight he turned off the road, circled through the brush, and several miles south of town he struck a narrow grass-grown trail that Fletcher had told him led to Cheseldine's camp. Horse tracks along this trail were not less than a week old, very likely not much more. It would wound in and out and around brush-covered foothills and through the arroyos and gullies lined with mesquite, cottonwood, and scrub oak. In an hour, Dwayne struck the slope of Mount Ord. As he climbed, he got out of view of the rolling black-spotted country, partly desert, partly fertile, with long, bright lines of dry stream beds winding way to grow dim in the distance. He got among the broken rocks and cliffs, and here the open, downward rolling land disappeared. He was hard put to it to find the trail. He lost it repeatedly and made slow progress. Finally, he climbed into a region of all rock benches, rough here, smooth there, with only occasional scratch of iron horseshoe to guide him. Many times he had to go ahead and then work to the right or left till he found his way again. It was slow work. It took all day, and night found him halfway up the mountain. He halted at a little side canyon with grass and water, and here he made camp. The night was clear and cool at that height, with a dark blue sky and a streak of stars blinking across the sky. With this day of action behind him, he felt better satisfied than he had been for some time. Here, on this venture, he was answering to a call he had so often directed his movements, perhaps his life, and it was one that logic or intelligence could take little stock of. And on this night, lonely like the ones he used to spend in the Nueces Gorge, and memorable of them because of a likeliness to old hiding places, he felt the pressing return of old haunting things, the past so long ago, wild flights, dead faces, and places of these were taken by one quiveringly alive, white, tragic, with its dark, intent, speaking eyes, Ray Longstreth. That last memory he yielded to until he slept. In the morning, satisfied that he had left still fewer tracks than he had followed up the trail, he led his horse up to the head of the canyon. There, a narrow crack in the low cliffs with branches of cedar fenced him in. Then he went back and took up the trail on foot. Without the horse, he made better time and climbed through the deep clefts and wide canyons, over ridges, up shelving slopes, along precipices, a long, hard climb, till he reached what he concluded was a divide. Going down was easier, though. The farther he followed the dim and winding trail, the wider the broken battlements of rock. Above him he saw the black fringe of pinyon and pine, and above that the bold peak, bare, yellow, like a desert butte. Once, though, wide gateway between great escarpments, he saw the lower country beyond the range, and beyond this, vast and clear as it lay in his sight, was the great river that made the Big Bend. He went down and down, wondering how a horse could follow that broken trail, believing there must be a better one somewhere into the Cheseldine's hiding place. He rounded a jutting corner where view had been shut off, and presently came out upon the rim of a high wall. Beneath, like a green gulf seen through the blue haze, lay an amphitheater walled in on the two sides he could see. It lay perhaps 1,000 feet below him, and plain as all the other features of that wild environment, there shone a big red stone or adobe cabin, white water shining away between great borders, and horses and cattle dotting the levels. It was peaceful, beautiful scene. Dwayne could not help grinding his teeth at the thought of rustlers living there in a quiet and ease. Dwayne worked halfway down to the level, and, well hidden in the niche, he settled himself to watch both trail and valley. He made note of the position of the sun and saw that if anything developed or if he decided to descend any further, there was a small likelihood of his getting back to his camp before dark. To try that after nightfall, he imagined, would have been vain in effort. Then he bent his keen eyes downward. The cabin appeared to be a crude structure, though large in size. It had, of course, been built by outlaws. There was no garden, no cultivated field, no corral, excepting for the rude pile of stones and logs plastered together with mud. The valley was as wild, probably as the day of discovery. Dwayne seemed to have been watching for a long time before he saw any sign of a man, and this one apparently went to the stream for water and then returned to the cabin. The sun went down behind the wall, and the shadows were born in darker places of the valley. Dwayne began to want to get closer to the cabin, what he had taken this arduous climb for. He held back, however, trying to evolve further plans. While he was pondering, the shadows quickly gathered and darkened. If he was going to go back to camp, he must set out at once, yet still he lingered. And suddenly his wide roving eyes caught sight of two horsemen riding up the valley. They must have entered at the point below, round the huge abutment of rock. Beyond Dwayne's range of sight, their horses were tired and stopped at the stream for a long drink. Dwayne left his perch, took to the steep trail, and descended as fast as he could without making a noise. Didn't take him long to reach the valley floor. It was almost level, with deep grass and here and there clumps of bushes. Twilight was already thick down there. Dwayne marked the location of the trail and began to slip like a shadow through the grass and from bush to bush. He saw a bright light before he made out the dark outline of the cabin. Then he heard voices, a merry whistle, a coarse song, and the clink of iron cooking utensils. He smelled fragrant wood smoke. He saw moving dark figures cross the light. Evidently there was a wide door, or else the fire was out in the open. Dwayne swerved to the left out of direct line with the light and thus able to see better, and then he advanced noiselessly but swiftly toward the back of the house. There were trees close to the wall. He would make no noise and could scarcely be seen if there was no watchdog. But all this outlaw days he had taken risks with only his useless life at stake. Now, with that changed, he advanced stealthily and bold as an Indian. He reached the cover of the trees and knew he was hidden in their shadows. For at a few paces distance he had been able to see only their tops. From there he slipped up to the house and felt along the wall with his hands. He came to a little window where light shone through, and he peeped in. He saw a room shrouded in shadows, a lamp turned low, table, chairs. He saw an open door with bright flare beyond, but he could not see the fire. Voices came indistinctly. Without hesitation, Dwayne stole further along, the way to the end of the cabin. Peeping around, he saw only the flare of light on bare ground. Retracing his cautious steps, he paused at the crack again, saw that no man was in the room, and he went around to that end of the cabin. Fortune favored him. There were bushes, an old shed, a wood pile, all the cover he needed at the corner. But he did not even need to crawl. Before he peered through the rough corner of the wall and the bush grown close to it, Dwayne paused a moment. This excitement was different from that he had always felt when he pursued. It had no bitterness, no pain, no dread. There was as much danger here, perhaps even more, yet it wasn't the same. Then he looked. He saw a bright fire, a red-faced man bending over it, whistling, while he handed a steaming pot. Over him was a roof shed built against the wall with 2 open sides and 2 supporting posts. Dwayne's second glance, not so blinded by the sudden bright light, made out the other men, 3 in the shadow, 2 in the flare, but with their backs to him. It's a smoother trail by long odds, but it ain't so short as the one right over the mountain, one outlaw was saying. What's you eatin', Panhandle? Ejaculated another. Blossom and me rode from Fairway Springs where Poggin is with some of the gang. Excuse me, Phil. Sure, I didn't see you coming in, and Bolt never said nothing. Took you a long time to get here, but I guess that's just as well, spoke up a smooth, suave voice with a ring in it. Longstreth's voice. Cheseldine's voice. Here they were. Cheseldine, Phil, Nell, Blossom Kane, Panhandle Smith, Bolt. How well Dwayne remembered their names. All here, the big men of Cheseldine's gang, except the biggest, Poggin. Dwayne had hold them, and his sensations of the moment deadened sight and sound of what was before him. He sank down, controlled himself, silenced a mountain exultation. Then, from a less strained position, he peered forth again. The outlaws were waiting for supper. Their conversation might have been that of cowboys in camp, ranchers at a roundup. Dwayne listened with eager ears, waiting for the business talk that he felt would come. All the time he watched with the eyes of a wolf upon his quarry. Blossom Kane was the lean-limbed messenger who had so angered Fletcher. Bolt was giant in stature, dark-bearded, silent. Panhandle Smith was the red-faced cook, merry, profane, short, bow-legged men resembling many rustlers Dwayne had known, particularly Luke Stevens. And Nell, who sat there tall, slim, like a boy in build, like a boy in years, with his pale, smooth, expressionless face and his cold gray eyes. And Longstreth, who had leaned against the wall, handsome with his dark face and beard like an aristocrat, resembled many a rich Louisiana planter Dwayne had met before. The sixth man sat so much in the shadow that he could not plainly be discerned, and though addressed, his name was not mentioned. Panhandle Smith carried pots and pans into the cabin and cheerfully called out, "If you gents are hungry for grub, don't look for me to feed you with a spoon." The outlaws piled inside and made a great bustle and clatter as they sat to their meal. Like hungry men, they didn't talk much. Dwayne waited there a while, then guardedly got up and crept around to the other side of the cabin. After he became used to the dark again, he ventured to steal along the wall to the window and peeped in. The outlaws were in the first room and could not be seen. Dwayne waited. The moments dragged endlessly, his heart pounded. Longstreth entered, turned up the light, and taking a box of cigars from the table, he carried it out. "Here, you fellers go outside and smoke," he said, "Nell. Come on now, let's get it over." He returned, sat down, lighted a cigar for himself, and put his booted feet up on the table. Dwayne saw that the room was comfortably, even luxuriously furnished. There must have been a good trail, he thought, else how could all that stuff be packed in here? Most assuredly it would not have come over the trail he traveled. Presently he heard the men go outside, and their voices became indistinct. Then Nell came in and seated himself without any of the chief's ease. He seemed preoccupied and, as always, cold. "What's wrong, Nell? Why didn't you get here sooner?" queried Longstreth. "Poggin, damn him. We're on the outs again." "What fer? Ain't he needn't get that sore. He's breaking a new hoss over at Fairway, and you know him where a hoss is concerned. That kept him, I reckon, more'n anything. What else? Get out of your system so we can get on with the new job." "Well, it begins back a ways. I don't know how long ago, weeks. Stranger rode into Ord and got down and easy like as if he owned the place. Seemed familiar to me, but I wasn't sure, and I looked him over and I left trying to place him in my mind. What'd he look like?" "Rangy, powerful man. White hair over his temples, still hard face, eyes like knives. The way he packed guns and the way he walked and stood and swung his right hand showed me what he was. Can't fool me on he's sharp with a gun. And he had a grand horse, a big black." "I met your man," said Longstreth. "No," exclaimed Nell. It was wonderful to hear surprise expressed by this man that did not in the least show it his strange physiognomy. Nell laughed at the short, grim, hollow laugh. Boss, this here big gent drifts into Ord and again makes up to Jim Fletcher. Jim, you know, is easily led. He likes men, and when a posse comes along trailing a blind lead, hunting the wrong way for a man who held up the number 6, why, Jim, he up and takes a stranger to be the fly road agent and gets a cotton to him. Got money out of him for sure. And that's what stumps me even more. What's this man's game? I happen to know, boss, that he couldn't have held up number 6. How do you know? Demanded Longstreth. 'Cause I did the job. Dark and stormy passion clouded the chief's face. Damn you, Nell, you're incorrigible. You're unreliable. Another break like that queers you with me. Did you tell Poggin? Yes. That's the one reason we fell out. He raved. I thought he was going to kill me. Why did you tackle such a risky job without help or a plan? You had offered, that's all. And it was easy, but it was a mistake. I got the country and the railroad hollering for nothing. I just couldn't help it. You know what idleness means to one of us. You know also that this very life breeds fatality. It's wrong, that's why. I was born of good parents, and I know that's right. We're wrong. We can't beat the end, that's all. And for my part, I don't care a damn when it comes. Fine wise talk from you, Nell, said Longstreth scornfully. Go on with your story. As I said, Jim cottons to the Pretender, and they got chummy. They're together all the time. You can gamble Jim told all he knew and then some. Little liquor loosens his tongue. Several of the boys rode over from Ord, and one of them went to Poggin and says Jim Fletcher has a new man for the gang. Poggin, you know, is always ready for any new man. He says if one doesn't turn out good, he can be shut off easy enough. He rather liked the way this new part of Jim's was boosted. Jim and Poggin always hit it up together, so till I got in on the deal, Jim's pardon was already in the gang, without Poggin or you ever seen him. Then I got to figuring hard. Just where I'd ever seen this chap. As it turned out, I never had seen him, which accounts for my being doubtful. I never forget any man I've seen. I dug up a lot of old papers from my kit and went over 'em, letters, pictures, clippings, and all that. I guess I had a pretty good notion that I was looking for and who I wanted to make sure of. As I found it, and I knew my man, but I didn't spring it on Poggin. Oh, no. I want to have some fun with him when it comes time. He'll be wilder than a trapped wolf. I sent Blossom over to Ord to get word from Jim, and when he verified all his talk, I sent Blossom again with a message calculated to make Jim jump. Poggin got sore and said if for Jim and I could come over here to see you with the new job, he'd meet me in Ord. Nell had spoken hurriedly and low, and now and then with passion. His pale eyes glinted like fire and ice. Now his voice fell to a whisper. Who do you think Fletcher's new man is? Who? Demanded Longstreth. It's Buck Duane. Down came Longstreth's boots with a crash. Then his body grew rigid. The Nueces outlaw? That two-shot ace of spades gun thrower who killed Bland Alloway and Hardin? Nell whispered this last name with more feeling than apparent circumstance demanded. Yes, and Hardin. The best of one of them Rimrock fellers, Buck Duane. Longstreth was so ghastly white now that his black mustache seemed outlined against chalk. He eyed his grim lieutenant. They understood each other without more words. It was enough that Buck Duane was there in Big Bend. Longstreth rose presently and reached for a flask from which he drank, and then offered it to Nell, who waved it aside. "Nell," began the chief slowly as he wiped his lips, "I gathered you have some grudge against this Buck Duane?" "Yes." "Well, don't be a fool now. Don't do what Poggin or most of you men would. Don't meet this Buck Duane. I have reason to believe he's a Texas Ranger now." "The hell you say!" exclaimed Nell. "Yes. Go to Ord, give Jim Fletcher a hunch. He'll get Poggin, and they'll fix even with Buck Duane." "All right, I'll do my best. But if I run into Duane, don't run into him." Longstreth's voice fairly rang with the force of his passion and command. He wiped his face, drank again from the flask, and sat down. Resumed his smoking, and drawing a paper from his vest pocket, began to study it. "Well, I'm glad that's settled," he said, evidently referring to Duane matter. "Now for the job. This is October the 18th. On or before the 25th, there'll be a shipment of gold reach the Ranchers' Bank of Val Verde. After you return to Ord, give Poggin these orders. Keep the gang quiet. You, Poggin, Kane, Fletcher, Panhandle, Smith, and Bolt to be in on the secret in the job. Nobody else. You leave Ord on the 23rd. Ride across the country by trail till you get within sight of Mercer. It's 100 miles from Bradford to Val Verde. About the same from Ord. Time your travel to get you near Val Verde on the morning of the 26th. You won't have to more than trot your horses. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, sharp, right into town and up to the Ranchers' Bank. Val Verde's a pretty big town. Never been any hold-ups there. Town feels safe. Make it clean, fast, daylight job. That's all. You got the details?" Nell did not even ask for the dates again. "Suppose Poggin or me might get detained?" he asked. Longstreth bent a dark glance upon his lieutenant. "You never can tell what'll come off," continued Nell. "I'll do my best. The minute you see Poggin, tell him. Job on hand steadies him. And I say again, look to it that nothing happens. Either you or Poggin carry the job through, but I want both of you in it. Break for the hills, and when you get up in the rocks where you can hide your tracks, head for Mount Ord. When all's quiet again, I'll join you there. That's all. Call in the boys." Like a swift shadow, and as noiseless as Duane stole across the level toward the dark wall of the rock, every nerve was strung wire. For a little while his mind was cluttered and clogged with whirling thoughts from which, like flashing scroll, unrolled the long, baffling order of action. The game was now in his hands. He must cross Mount Ord at night. The feature was improbable, but it might be done. He must ride into Bradford, 40 miles from the foothills, before 8 o'clock the next morning. He must telegraph McNelly to be in Val Verde on the 25th. He must ride back to Ord to intercept Nell, face be denounced and kill him, and while the iron was hot, strike hard to win Poggin's half-won interest as he had wholly won Fletcher's. Failing that last, he must let the outlaws alone to bide their time in Ord, to be free to ride on their new job in Val Verde. In the meantime, he must plan to arrest Longstreth. It was a magnificent outlaw, incredible, alluring, unfathomable in its nameless certainty. He felt like fate. He seemed to be the iron consequences falling upon these doomed outlaws. Under the wall, the shadows were black. Only the tips of the trees and crags were showing, yet he went straight to the trail. It was merely a grayness between borders of black. He climbed and never stopped. It did not seem steep. His feet might have had eyes. He surmounted the wall, and looking down into the ebony gulf pierced by one point of light, he lifted a menacing arm and shook it, and he strode on and did not falter till he reached the huge shelving cliffs. Here he lost the trail. There was nerve, but he remembered the shapes, the points, and notches of the rock above before he reached the ruins of the splintered ramparts and jumbles of broken walls. The moon topped the eastern slope of the mountain. In the mystifying blackness, he had dreaded changed to the magic silver light. It seemed as light as day, only soft, mellow, and the air held transparent sheen. He ran up the bare ridges and down the smooth slopes, and like a goat jumped from rock to rock. In this light he knew his way and lost no time looking for the trail. He crossed the divide and then had all downhill before him. Swiftly he descended, almost sure of his memory of the landmarks. He did not remember having studied them in the ascent, yet there they were, even in changed light, familiar to his sight. What he'd once seen is pictured in his mind, and true as a deer striking for home, he reached the canyon where he had left his horse. Bullet was quickly and easily found. Duane threw on the saddle and pack, cinched them tight, and resumed his descent. The worst was now to come. Bare downward steps and rocks, sliding, weathered slopes, narrow black gullies, 1,000 openings in a maze of broken stones. These Duanes had to descend in fast time, leading a giant horse. Bullet was cracked the loose fragments and sent them rolling and slid them down the scaly slopes and plunged down with steps, followed like a faithful dog at Duane's heels. Hours passed as moments. Duane was equal to his great opportunity, but he could not quell that self in him which reached back over the lapse of lonely, searing years and found the boy in him. He who had been worse than dead was now grasping at the skirts of life, which means victory, honor, happiness. Duane knew he was not just writing the part of his mind. Small wonder that he was not insane. He thought he tramped on downward. His marvelous faculty for covering rough ground and holding true to course, never before even in flight so keen and acute. Yet all the time a spirit was keeping step with him. Thought of Ray Longstreth. As he left her, made his mark, made him weak. But now, with the game clear to its end, with the trap ready to spring, with success strangely haunting him, Duane could not dispel memory of her. He saw her white face with its sweet, sad lips and the dark eyes so tender and tragic, and time and distance and risk and toil was nothing. The moon sloped to the west. Shadows of trees and crags now crossed to the other side of him. The stars dimmed. Then he was now out of the rocks. With the dim trail at his feet, mounting Bullet, he made sure work of the long slope and foothills and the rolling land leading down to Ord. The little outlaw camp with its shacks and cabins and row of houses lay silent and dark under the paling moon. Duane passed by on the lower trail and headed out into the road and put Bullet into a gallop. He watched the dying moon, the waning stars in the east. He had time to spare, so he saved the horse. Nell would be leaving the rendezvous about time Duane turned back toward Ord. Between noon and sunset they would meet. The night wore on. The moon sank behind the low mountains in the west. The stars brightened for a while and then faded. Gray gloom enveloped the world, thickened, lay like smoke over the road. Then shade by shade it lightened. Through the transparent obscurity shone a dim light. Duane reached Bradford before dawn. He dismounted some distance from the tracks, tied his horse, and then crossed over to the station. He heard the clicking of the telegraph instrument, and it thrilled him. An operator sat inside, reading. When Dane tapped on the window, he looked up with a startled glance and swiftly to unlock the door. "Hello, give me a paper and pencil, quick," whispered Duane. With trembling hands, the operator complied. Dwayne wrote out the message he handed carefully that he had composed. Send this, repeat it to make sure, and then keep mum. I'll see you again. Goodbye. The operator stared but did not speak a word. Dwayne left as stealthily and swiftly as he come. He walked his horse a couple of miles back on the road and then rested him till the break of day. The east was beginning to redden. Dwayne turned grimly in the direction of Ord. When Dwayne swung into the wide grassy square in the outskirts of Ord, saw a bunch of saddled horses hitched to the front of the tavern. He knew what that meant. Luck still favored him, if it would only hold, but he could ask no more. The rest was a matter of how greatly he could make his power felt. In open conflict against odds lay in the balance. That'd be fatal to him, and to avoid it, he had to trust his name and appearance he must make terrible. He knew outlaws. He knew what qualities held them. He knew what to exaggerate. There was not an outlaw in sight. The dusty horses had cut distance that morning. As Dwayne dismounted, he heard loud, angry voices inside the tavern. He removed coat and vest, hung them over the pommel. He packed 2 guns, one belted high on the left hip, the other swinging low on the right side. He neither looked nor listened, but boldly pushed the door and stepped inside. The big room was full of men, and every man pivoted toward him. Nell's pale face flashed in Dwayne's swift sight, then Bolt's, then Blossom Kane's, then Panhandle Smith's, then Fletcher's, then others that were familiar, and last that of Poggin. Though Dwayne had never seen Poggin or heard him described, he knew him, for he saw a face that was a record of great and evil deeds. There was absolute silence. The outlaws were lying back of a long table which there was papers, stacks of silver coin, a bundle of bills, and a huge gold-mounted gun. "Are you gents looking for me?" asked Dwayne. He gave his voice all the ringing and force and power which it was capable of. Then he stepped back, free of anything, with all the outlaws before him. Nell stood quivering, but his face might have been a mask. The other outlaws looked for him. Jim Fletcher flung up his hands. "My God, Dodge, what'd you bust in here for?" he said plaintively, and slowly stepped forward. His action was that of a man true to himself. He meant he had been a sponsor for Dwayne, and now he'd stand by him. "Back, Fletcher," called Dwayne. His voice made the outlaw jump. "Hold on, Dodge, and y'all, everybody," said Fletcher. "Let me talk. Seeing I'm in wrong here." His persuasions did not ease the strain. "Go ahead, talk," said Poggin. Fletcher turned to Dwayne. "Pard, I'm taking it on myself that you meet enemies here when I swore you'd meet friends. It's my fault. I'll stand by you if you let me." "No, Jim," replied Dwayne. "But what'd you come for without signal?" burst out Fletcher in distress. He saw nothing but catastrophe in this meeting. "Jim, I ain't pressing my company none, but when I'm wanted bad—" Fletcher stopped him with a raised hand, then he turned to Poggin with a rude dignity. "Poggy, he's my pard, and he's riled. I never told him a word to make him sore. I only said Nell hadn't no more use for him than me. Now, what you say goes in this gang. I never failed you in my life. Here's my pard. I vouch for him. Will you stand for me? There's going to be hell if you don't, and you's with a big job on hand." While Fletcher toiled over his slow, earnest persuasion, Dwayne had his gaze riveted on Poggin. There was something leonine about Poggin. He was tawny. He blazed. He seemed beautiful as fire. Was absolutely beautiful, but look at it closer with a glance, seeing the physical man instead of that thing which shone in front of him. He was perfect build, with muscles that swelled and rippled, bulging his clothes, with the magnificent head and face of a cruel, fierce, tawny-eyed jaguar. Looking at this strange Poggin, instinctively divining his abnormal and hideous power, Dwayne had for the first time in his life the inward quaking fear of a man. It was like cold tongue bell ringing with him, numbing his heart. The old instinctive firing of blood followed, but did not give way to that fear. He knew, he felt something here deeper than thought he could go, and he hated Poggin. The individual had been considering Fletcher's appeal. "Jim, ante up," he said, "and if Phil doesn't raise us with a big hand, well, he'll get called and your pard can set in the game." Every eye shifted to Nell. He was dead white. He laughed, and anyone hearing that laugh would have realized his intense anger equally with an assurance which made him master of the situation. "Poggin, you're a gambler. You are. The ace-high, straight-flush hand of the Big Ben," he said, with a stingy scorn. "I'll bet you my roll to a greaser peso that I can deal you a hand you'll be afraid to play." "Phil, you're talking wild," growled Poggin, with both advice and menace to his tone. "If there's anything you hate, it's a man who pretends to be somebody else when he's not. That so?" Poggin nodded in a slow gathering wrath. "Well, Jim's new pard, this man Dodge, he's not who he seems. Oh, no, he's hell of a lot different, but I know him. And when I spring his name on you, Poggin, you'll freeze to your gizzard. Do you know, you get me? You'll freeze, and your hand'll be stiff when it ought to be lightning, all because you realize you've been standing there 5 minutes alive standing in front of him." If not hate, then assuredly great passion toward Poggin managed itself in Nell's scornful, fiery address and the shaking hand he thrust before Poggin's face. In the ensuing silent pause, Nell's panting could be plainly heard. The other men were pale, watchful, cautiously edging either way to the wall, leaving the principals and Dwayne in the center of the room. "Spring his name, then, you," said Poggin violently with a curse. Strangely, Nell did not even look at the man he was about to denounce. He leaned toward Poggin, his hands, his body, his long head, all somewhat expressive of what his face disguised. "Buck Dwayne," he yelled suddenly. The name did not make any great difference in Poggin, but Nell's passionate, swift utterance carried the suggestion that the name ought to bring Poggin to quick action. It was possible, too, that Nell's manner, the import of his denunciation, the meaning back of all his passion held Poggin bound more than surprised. For the outlaw certainly was surprised, perhaps staggered at the idea that he, Poggin, had been about to stand sponsor with Fletcher for a famous outlaw, hated and feared by outlaws. Nell waited for a long moment, and then his face broke into cold immobility and an extraordinary expression of devilish glee. He had hounded the great Poggin into something that gave him vicious, monstrous joy. "Buck Dwayne, yes," he broke out hotly, "the Nueces gunman, that two-shot ace of spades lone wolf. You and I, we've been heard 1,000 times of him, talked about him often, and here he in front of you, Poggin. You were backing Fletcher's new pard, Buck Dwayne, and he fooled you both, but for me. But I know him, and I know he drifted in here to flash a gun on Cheseldine, on you, on me. Ha! Don't tell me he wanted to join the gang. You know a gunman, for you're one yourself. Don't you always want to kill another man? And don't you always want to meet a real man, not a four-flush? It's the madness of a gunman, and you know it. Well, Dwayne faced you, called you. When I sprung his name, what ought you have done? What would the boss, anybody, expected of Poggin? Did you throw your gun swift like you have so often? No, you froze. Why? Because there's a man with the kind of nerve you'd love to have. Because he's great, meeting us here alone. Because you know he's a wonder with a gun. And you love life, because you and I, every damn man here, had to take his front, each to himself. If we all drew, we'd kill him, sure. But who's gonna lead? Who's gonna be first? Who's gonna make him draw? Not you, Poggin. You leave that for a lesser man, me, who've lived to see you a coward. Comes once to every gunman. You met your match in Buck Duane, and by God, I'm glad. Here's once I show you up. The hoarse, taunting voice failed. Nell stepped back from the comrade he hated. He was wet, shaking, haggard, but magnificent. Buck Duane, do you remember Hardin? He asked, in scarcely audible voice. Yes, replied Duane, and a flash of insight made clear Nell's attitude. You met him, forced him to draw, and killed him. Yes. Hardin was the best part I ever had. His teeth clicked together tight, and his lips set in a thin line. The room grew still, and every breath ceased. The time for words to pass. In that long moment of suspense, Nell's body gradually stiffened, and at last, quivering, ceased. He crouched. His eyes had soul-piercing fire. Duane watched them. He waited. He caught, he thought, the breaking of Nell's muscle-bound rigidity, and then he drew. Through the smoke of his gun, he saw two red spurts of flame. Nell's bullets thudded into the ceiling. He fell with a scream like a wild thing in agony. Duane did not see Nell die. He watched Poggin, and Poggin, like a stricken and astounded man, looked down upon his prostrate comrade. Fletcher ran at Duane with his hands aloft. Hit the trail, you liar, or you'll have to kill me, he yelled. With hands up, he shouldered and bodied Duane out of the room. Duane leaped on his horse, spurred, and plunged away.